Welcome to the Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Helga Janssen-Daubia, Michaela Miller, standing by at the Workers' World Labour News Desk. Over the past year, we've seen a serious salary dispute in the public sector. This after government reneged on implementing the final year's salary of the previous agreement and unilaterally implemented a wage freeze. The public sector salary dispute has since been settled, but all is not done and dusted, as there are still unresolved matters, and it seems labour unrest in the sector is likely to occur in the near future. Before we start our discussion, let's take a look at an insert produced by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
The focus has to be on how best to maximize the tax revenue that we got. And naturally, that's what we also do at home.
Current problem, especially in the public sector, is created by the neoliberal policies which have been adopted by the ANC government. And they have resulted in budget cuts, and these budget cuts affect firstly the delivery of services, but also affect the number of employees in a particular workplace. And across government departments, we have seen the attack on the public sector wage bill, which has meant that government retrenches without going through the normal route of retrenchment.
Particularly in the essential services sector, like the health and welfare, like the police services, the security industry as well, we find that workers are swamped or overburdened with work, where you get about 3 employees or 1 employee doing the work of 3 employees as such. And their work situation, conditions of service hasn't improved tremendously, particularly the salary increases itself. So we've been mooting this idea of that there should be a proper assessment of the number of people that are required to perform a particular function. But as you aware, government has always stood by the stance to say, listen, they don't have the necessary funds to employ more public servants itself.
It is an injustice for our workers in the country to really be doing the job that are supposed to be done by 3 people. It is because of underemployment that is happening in the public service. It is demoralizing. It is causing a lot of emotional stress, and hence we have looked at the surveys and research that was beginning to say that those workers that are doing that are being admitted in hospital for depression. And that's not good for the families, it's not good for the economy.
Workers are very angry, we must say, because they strongly feel that government is not appreciating the work that they do, particularly to the citizens of the country. Because if you look at the current situation caused by the pandemic, workers have put an extra mile in what they would normally do in their normal daily duties. So this on its own is saying government does not actually care as to whether you have put extra work and you have actually put your life at risk because of the COVID situation we find ourselves in.
In the interim, we had demands for our new salary increases for the financial year 2021. You must remember the old agreement expired in 2020, so we had to negotiate new conditions or new demands for 2021. Fortunately, what we had set out in our demands never materialized.
It was a 3-year agreement. Yes, in fact, that's quite worrying because it creates a wrong trend, which I think if we as unions were to let that go, would obviously create a trend in the future wherein there would be certain agreements that are signed without being implemented. It's quite worrying that we have such a situation wherein we negotiated in good faith and then ultimately there are challenges that we're still obviously in the court processes in dealing with.
Unions realized that with the impact of the economy, the impact of COVID that is on the economy, that we should settle for whatever that was offered by the employer. So for this year's salary increase, we have negotiated and we have signed an agreement. It's a single term agreement which will expire next year in 2022.
We arrived at a cash gratuity on the basis that it was better than workers having to not have any increase in 2021 because they also did not have increase in 2020. So therefore we needed to find a balance so that at least the workers have got something to take home.
As Pope Crew did not assign that agreement, of course we do understand that it obviously affects all of us because the majority of unions have signed for it.
So going forward, we will be adamant not to sign multi-term agreements because we never know what's going to happen in the future itself. So we'll be demanding single-term agreements, and we'll obviously key to it, as you pointed out in the initial, that moratorium on the filling of posts must be lifted.
We are to confront what has confronted us. We've got to be united as federations. We've got to work together as workers across federations. Because there can't be a point where we reach an agreement in the collective bargaining and then all of a sudden you don't want to comply.
As the new negotiations begin, it is important that, as Satu were saying, let's be united as the workers and ensure that we push the employer at the level of the bargaining chamber instead of really leaving the battleground and go and fight outside.
As we saw there from the insert, unions threatening rolling mass action and calling this what they say it is, an austerity economy. They say the government is using austerity measures to cut services and wages to the most vulnerable and the poorest workers in this country. Don't go away, we'll be back after this to discuss this and more.
Welcome back. Your highlights this week. The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa embarked on a national strike following a deadlock in negotiations for a new wage deal in the metal and engineering industry. COSATU strikes for government to fix up the economy and the public sector. The body count of suspected Zama-Zamas or illegal miners in Orkney continues to rise. And internationally, the wave of the US labor unrest could see tens of thousands on strike within weeks from healthcare to Hollywood. For more, stay tuned for the full bulletin. The Workers' World New Time slot for the season starts today. Remember, Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. and repeats on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. right here on Cape Town TV. To get into this week's topic of discussion, here's Helga.
Thank you, Michaela. Welcome back. We're talking, of course, the public sector wage negotiations and the agreement. And joining us in studio, well, via Zoom at least, we're joined by SAFTU's Trevor Shaku, spokesperson at SAFTU. Welcome and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us.
We're also welcoming Dr. Lafundo Malahutsi from FEDUSA, who works in the public sector unit at FEDUSA. Welcome, Dr. Malahutsi. He seems to have a little bit of a gremlin in his system. Our producers will work on that. Certainly, no stranger to the Workers' World show, Nahawu, represented here by Mr. Bakolisi Mali. Welcome, Mr. Mali.
Welcome, ma'am, and greetings to all the panelists and the viewers at home.
Thank you. And of course, certainly no stranger to the Workers' World Labour Show, resident political economist at the Alternative Information and Development Centre, Dominic Brown. Welcome once again, Dominic.
Thank you, Helga, and hi to everyone.
Dominic, let's start with you. We know via the media, of course, that the public sector agreement has been dragging on within the context of COVID. But there are some things that predate the finalization of the agreement. Just give us an overview of what the current situation is with the settlement and what does the agreement entail?
So in July, I think there's a few different processes, and it's probably worth unpacking them. The one relates to the 2018 public sector wage agreement. And in April, the 1st of April last year, government and treasury did not pay the increases that was agreed to in 2018. So in other words, reneged on the final year of the 2018 public sector wage agreement. That's being challenged in courts, and the court case at the Constitutional Court was on the 24th of August, but Trevor and Pakolisi can, I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but that process is still unfolding. So that's one. Two, there's another process which relates to determining the new wage agreement. Generally, this is set over 3 years. This time around, it's only a 1-year agreement, which the majority of the public sector unions have agreed to. I think the three that's not agreed to it at the public sector collective bargaining council is Nahau, who's represented here, Pop Crew, as well as SAPU, who's a SAFTU affiliate. And the agreement is to say that there will be a 1.5% pay progression, which is generally part of the public sector wage package. And in addition to that, there will be a rand amount increase, and the amount would be dependent on where in the salary scale you are. So ranging from about 1,200 something to about 1,680, I think, at the top end of the scale. I mean, that's the state of play. I think the public sector unions are probably better placed to talk to the state of play. I think from AIDC side, we want to raise concerns that we felt over and above the concerns that's raised by the public sector unions. And for us, what we see is, and this is a long-standing issue, going back to at least 2018.
Dominic, can I ask you just to pause on the additional issues that AIDC wants to raise, and we will make time for that. I want to bring in Fedusa into this part of the conversation. Dr. Malahutsi, two issues. One is, of course, reneging on the 2018 public sector wage agreement, and we are now in 2021. We've just concluded a new season of public sector agreements. And number two, of course, determining the new agreement. But now how Fedusa, my apologies, have accepted. Give us a sense of why your federation has accepted the latest 1.5% offer.
Thank you very much. Let me respond very quickly to your question. Fedusa and its affiliates accepted the offer, the revised offer by the employer of 1.5% pay progression, which was paid with effect from the 1st of July, 2021, and a 1,000 gratuity. It's like sort of a compensation to employees from level 1 to level 12 until we embark on the next salary negotiations for 2021-2022. The reason why we accepted the offer was based on the fact that we realized that half a loaf is better than nothing. And the prolonged negotiations were having a serious impact in the well-being and the lifestyle of our members. And we felt that it's better to accept that offer so that we break the impasse.
Thank you for that. I want to bring in SAFTU and Nahau, of course, two trade unions that have been one of the biggest challenges to this new wage negotiation and wage agreement. Let's start with SAFTU. SAFTU, Dr. Malayetsi, of course, speaks about half a loaf being better than nothing, that the conditions under which the negotiations had been taking place was putting even more pressure, and we think of the COVID environment. Yet SAFTU, and we'll give Nahawu a chance in a moment, SAFTU had a completely different position to not accepting the initial offer. Trevor?
Thanks. It is unfortunate that in most instances, the interests of workers, especially the public sector, got compromised because comrades believed that half a loaf is better than nothing. But in reality, because the thing is that the government offering this kind of a wage agreement is and fits to the current fiscal and monetary policies which it has adopted, part of which is to impose fiscal strain on the wage bill of the public sector workers. Now, if you only view this in the manner in which it's short-sighted and therefore merely seeks to excuse the political and economic implications of the wage agreement itself, you will end up saying a half loaf is better than nothing. Because in the main, this is a serious issue, not only in terms of the wage agreement per se, but keeping the wage bill at about cutting 160 billion rands from the wage bill for the next 3 years, which affected the wage agreement for this year and the wage agreement for last year to this year, is actually and must be viewed in the sense that politically and economically, it is an attack on workers, and therefore it is also not going to affect the wage increments, but it's also going to affect the hiring of teachers and the filling of promotional posts, which it has already started as we speak. And in this instance, the opposition which we put against the wage agreement or the wage negotiation, the offer which was put on the table by government, was mainly guided by the fact that we consciously see this as an onslaught against the public sector workers, and therefore we must oppose it in all phases.
Thank you for that. Bakalisi, let's bring you in here. Trevor, of course, shaping or sketching the scenario of the impact that this will have, particularly on the retention of teachers in the public education system. Give us a sense of what Nahawu's position has been in terms of challenging this latest round of finalized wage negotiations.
Okay. Look, we think as Nehawu we must start to correct some articulations made by Fedusai. It is not correct to say there was a 1.5 pay progression paid to workers with effect from the 1st of July. That was supposed to be paid. At this stage, there's no 1.5% paid to workers. The second thing, it is indeed unfortunate that people would talk about half a loaf better than nothing. Because the reality of the matter is that the current form of an agreement that talks about cash gratuity, what we as Nehawu call it bank charges, does not really affect the baseline of workers. It does not talk to a pension contribution by employer. So for all these years, if you read the agreement, it says, we'll continue to pay you that cash gratuity until there's a new agreement that is being reached. So if government is not willing to reach anything, it simply means we'll continue to get that 1,000 rands that does not then contribute into your pension. Now, what really that means is that government is going to save a lot, because as much as there are issues that government would be wanting us to focus on, that a lot of money has been used on COVID and so on. The reality of the matter, it says workers must continue not to have a better life. and not appreciating the fact that in 2020 there was no salary increase of workers. So workers were now moved to be much more poorer, with about 5.4% in 2020. And then you say there's a better half a loaf in 2021, which is talking into gratuity. There is nothing that talks about the absorption of community health workers, which was a demand of workers. There is nothing that talks about the abolition of slave salaries, which is level 1 to level 3 in that. There is nothing that talks about increasing a government employee contribution to 2,500 rand so that workers can be able to go to banks, get loans for them to have houses, and you move them out of sheds. And people are now arguing that half a loaf is better than nothing. What is half a loaf that is better than nothing? Because in as far as we're concerned, this is not a salary increase. It is just a tip. The employer decided that we're going to give you a tip as workers, continue to live in poverty. And all others are saying half a loaf is better than nothing. And we don't agree. That's the reason why as NEHAWU never agreed to sign back.
Thank you so much for that. When we return, we'll pick up on the range of points that our guests have put on the table, most particularly that government will save a lot, but that half a loaf is in fact not better than a full loaf. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. Dominique, let's come to you. Both Trevor, Dr. Mulahatsi and Bakolisi made some very, very crucial points, and allow me just to refresh our viewers. The point that half a loaf is in fact not as good as a whole loaf. The fact that there are some issues, and I think this is perhaps what you wanted to raise, that have not been dealt with by the 2021 agreement. And of course the fact that this once-off payment is a tip, the kind of tip that you would give a car guard or a waiter, as Bakolisi was intimating. Just give us a sense of the positions of these unions and how they may affect going forward. Dominique?
So I want to take us in a slightly different direction, Alga. I want to give people a sense of what's actually happening here, because I don't think we are adequately mapping out the implications of the current initiatives by government. So the first thing I think that we must make clear is that whilst there's this 1 year agreement, what we're seeing is the kicking of the can down the road in the context of an election year, okay? And you don't want to alienate and anger a large base within the tripartite alliance, which is the public sector workers, okay? And then what you will see is going from next year and over the next 3 years is a massive slashing of the public sector wage bill, more than 9% in real terms over the next 3 years. Now, this is not simply an attack on workers. That's where there's actually a misunderstanding. This is an attack on the entire working class and the majority of poor people in this country. Why? So we're not going to see a reduction in wages only, okay? We will see that through below inflationary increases, yes. But in order for the wage bill to decrease by more than 9% in real terms over the next 3 years, we invariably and basically inevitably will have to see a reduction in the headcount in the public sector, okay? So what does this mean? So right now, there's 1.3 million public sector workers. This is just a couple of thousand more than we had in 1995. Just over 1.26 million public sector workers in 1995 to 1.3 million workers more than 30 years later, when the size of the population has grown dramatically. The majority of the public sector workers are teachers, nurses, and correctional services. That makes up 70%, okay? Now we know that already most schools, public schools, are understaffed in relation to teachers, okay? We are well aware that the health sector, not least in the context of the pandemic, is understaffed. By government's own accounts, we need more than 97,000 health workers by 2025 just to get the lowest provinces up to a minimum requirement. But we're going to see the very opposite happen. We're going to see a reduction in the number of teachers in the public sector, in the health workers in the health sector, etc. So this is actually not a half a loaf of bread. This is actually stealing from the poor. And actually, where I would agree with the comrade from Nahau in his response to the comrade from Fedusa, is that actually this is taking away from the majority of people in this country. And I think that's the context in which we must put the public sector wage agreement.
Thank you for that.
And I think that needs to be made clear.
Thank you for that, Dominique. Allow me to bring Fedusa in here. And I just want to give Fedusa the opportunity because, you know, we seem to be half a loaf is better than nothing. We're stealing. It is, in fact, theft from the poorest people. Dominique saying that over the next 3 years, we'll see a 9% slash in public sector spending, which of course includes wages. But Dr. Muller-Utsi, please give us a sense when you say that the impact of your workers in this period was so traumatizing. That is why you felt you needed to accept the offer that was on the table by the public sector employer. Give us a sense of what your workers have been going through.
Let me tell you, we are not here for fairy tales. When we get involved in fairy tales, we'll end up missing a point. And when we start politicking, let me tell you why we said half a loaf is better than nothing. And I'm surprised that my comrade from Nihau is saying half a loaf is better than, it's not better than nothing. Remember, when we started, the employer gave us 0%. When you move from 0%, he's right that the 1.5% is already there. It's a pay progression. But the difference is this pay progression, even people who were not going to get it are going to get it now. Then the issue of a 1,000 tip, that he calls it a tip, it means a lot to members who are overburdened by a lot of things that they are dealing with in their families. I can tell you, and then he can also tell you if he is honest. And the other guy, I don't know who is representing, the one who just spoke before me. If you go to a public servant and ask them what it feels like when they get that amount of 6,000, 7,000 or whatever backdated from the 1st of April, they will tell you that it makes a difference. Why? Because we are still dealing with the issue of Resolution 1 of 2018, which is before the court. In fact, it is Fedusa affiliated unions who took the matter to court. Where was Nihau? They joined those unions later. So you can't say when people didn't get increment for 2020 and they get something in 2021, you said it's nothing. Hence, we are saying half a loaf is better than nothing. They can say whatever, but they know that the truth is whatever was given to public servants. We can't say we were happy as Fedusa, but we have no choice but to agree with what was tabled. About electioneering, I can't comment on that because we are not in a political space. We are apolitical as Fedusa. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Muller-Utsi. It would seem, and this is just a general comment to all our guests before we go to the break, that what Fedusa describes is the immediacy of public sector workers and their financial and economic conditions. But Nahawu and SAFTU and even AIDC are sketching, as Dominic says, the long road where the can is rumbling down the road. I want to, before we go to the break, I want to just pose a question, and I need to. Some may say that we're politicking, but I think this is an important question to ask NAHAWU and to ask COSATU affiliates that despite the public sector wage battles, which predates 2021, and as you rightly say, there is a court case now dating to the 2018 public sector agreements, we are going into an election, a local government election. The Pop Crew affiliate has come out to support the ANC in this local government election, while at the same time being very, very challenging and defiant about the public sector wage finalization. The question that I want to pose to NAHAWU is to perhaps respond to how the perception of politicization is going to affect your members when the can has to be kicked and a fight has to be had at the courts. I'm going to leave our guests with that question, and when we come back, we're going to interrogate it even further to you at home. Don't go away, we'll be back after this.
Welcome back to Workers World Labour News. We hope you're safe and keeping well. Thanks for joining us. Members of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa have been on a national strike since Tuesday, the 5th of October, following a deadlock in negotiations for a new wage deal in the metal and engineering industry. Union members didn't report for duty in 5 of the country's 9 provinces, namely Gauteng, the Eastern Cape, Northern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and a number of rallies were held in the Western Cape. Workers marched to the Metals and Engineering Industry Bargaining Council as part of the first day of action. Unions want an 8% wage increase across the board, while employers have agreed to a 4.4% salary increase. Employer associations said the strike has had a minimal impact across the country except on the East Rand. Sicelo Hunduna, secretary of the Metal and Engineering Industry Bargaining Council, said there were no negotiations taking place, but the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration had offered to mediate and had called for parties back to the negotiation table. The Congress of South African Trade Unions called on their workers to join them on a national strike which took place on Thursday, 7th of October. In the Johannesburg CBD, the main march started at Mary Fitzgerald Square as part of Thursday's nationwide stay away and a protest action. Other marches were held in KwaZulu-Natal, Pietermaritzburg and Dundee in northern KwaZulu-Natal. COSATU's first Deputy President Michael Shingange explained that the conditions that workers have to operate under are such that the union must take to the streets and voice their displeasure. As part of the demands in the statement released, COSATU is demanding that the government and the private sector needs to act to fix the ailing economic mess that the country finds itself in and take seriously the issues that are affecting workers and South Africans in general. They are also calling for a reversal of budget cuts that have led to the wage freeze in the public sector. COSATU called upon the government and the private sectors to provide a written response on how they will implement the demands within 14 calendar days. In Orkney, northwest of South Africa, a bloody shootout with security officials and police left at least 6 miners dead. The incident came after a group of 300 Zama-Zamas allegedly attacked and shot at security officers and police when they attempted to stop them from delivering food parcels to illegal miners underground. Police spokesperson Sabata Mogwabone stated that 35 illegal miners have been arrested for attempted murder, causing an explosion, malicious damage to property, and conspiracy to commit a crime. He said that 4 bodies were found in the vicinity of the shaft, one discovered about 800 meters from the crime scene, while the 6th was found in bushes near the Kanana location. Some were treated by paramedics, while a few others were taken to hospital. The arrested suspects are expected to appear in court soon. And internationally, the wave of the US labor unrest could see tens of thousands on strike within weeks, from the healthcare to Hollywood. Workers are demanding higher wages, fighting cuts in wages and seeking better safety and conditions of employment, especially in the light of COVID-19. This could be the largest wave of the labour unrest since a series of teacher strikes in 2018 and 2019, which won major victories and gave the American labour movement a significant boost. It also plays out against a backdrop of an economy bouncing back from the torrid experience of widespread economic shutdowns during the coronavirus pandemic, but one that is still marked by profound inequality. Well, that's all from my side. If you have any story you'd like to share with us, you can send a message or a voice note to 081 552 4551 or simply send us an email to labour@wwmp.org.za. Helge is standing by to conclude this week's topic of discussion.
Welcome back. Before the break, we gave Bakolisi a whopper of a question. And we asked him to reflect on the perception that the COSATU unions, Nahawu and Pop Crew, were firmly in the alliance corner, yet when it came to the public sector battle, they were leading the charge. And what does that tell us, Bakolisi? We hope you've had a chance to reflect during the break.
Yeah. No, definitely. We know there exists that perception of the COSATU affiliates. Some, they say we are sleeping in one bed with the employer. But the reality of the matter is that those who have not been in another planet would have realized that as early as August in 2020, the first union, which was on a street during the lockdown, was actually Nehau. Whilst all others were on strike, but they were on strike behind their desktops. Like the other ones were now saying they are apolitical, and where Nehau was. Now, the issue now arises to say, what then becomes a Nehau viewpoint moving forward on this perception? The first thing that we want to raise is that in as much as COSATU is in alliance with the African National Congress, ours is a strategic alliance, is an alliance that we want to influence each other on policy positions and so on. But when it comes to us interfacing with employer, be it the employer led by ANC, be it the employer led by DA, we simply approach matters as a trade union. We were able to draw a line. That's why even when others are claiming that they were the first one to take matters to court, we were the first ones when issues deadlocked inside the PSCPC to declare a dispute as Nehau. Because we could not appreciate the fact that workers are going to suffer under the leadership of the African National Congress that we are in alliance with, that seeks to say at all times that it is in defense of collective bargaining that it fights. So there's no confusion here. And perhaps the confusion arises when people say, okay, yes, Bob Crew, yes, COSATU, they are saying there's a can now being kicked down the road. And that can lead to the elections of the 1st of November, 2021. And then what becomes the position of COSATU? So we want to clarify one thing, that COSATU as a federation has a National Congress position taken in 2013. A Congress attended by members from different affiliates. And in between, those who understand how trade unions function will appreciate that there is no leadership that can then change that decision in between the National Congress, because the National Congress becomes the highest decision-making body. Now, that is why Nehau said in its Central Executive Committee of December 2020, when it was very clear that there's an attack on collective bargaining, we're the first one to say, we respect the decisions of COSATU to say we'll support the African National Congress. But in spite of the fact that we are unable to increase subscription to workers are being attacked left, right, and center by the ANC-led government. we will not be in a position of using both our human and financial resources derived from the 80 rands to support the African National Congress. So if one is able then to read between the lines, you will get us that we are not prepared to use a single cent of workers. We are not prepared to use a single shop steward, a single employee of NEHAWU to go and campaign for the African National Congress in a current state of things. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So NEHAWU will not use its infrastructure to support electioneering. There are two things, and I'd like to bring Trevor just to take us into this part of the conversation. But Xolisi frames this current context of the public sector wage agreement as an attack on collective bargaining. And I think you said it earlier that this is, and I'm paraphrasing, this is an austerity offer. And that, as Dominic says, it is the working class and poor people who are paying the price for these austerity measures. Trevor?
Yes, and I agree with Dominic, because, as he said, this is not merely an attack on, and this is where I think our comrade from Feduza is missing the point. The issue here is not about the immediacy of whether you are able to get the gratuity, non-pensionable gratuity offer, but it's also, again, a question of the entire public sector wage bill, which, as we said earlier, and as Dominic affirmed, is that you are not going to experience the reduction in the headcount. That is the reduction in the number of the workforce that the public sector is utilizing in offering and providing services. Already you have seen with the KZN 2 weeks ago, announcing that they are retrenching about 6,000 people. And those posts actually have been vacant for the past 7 months, because when Minister Njimutara gave an update to Parliament in March, April, he actually showed that there were about 6,600 and something vacancies which were not filled in the education sector in KZN alone. And you had about 24,000 of vacant posts in the National Department of Basic Education. And these are created when, for instance, older people go on retirement. Instead of government and basic education hiring new teachers, it then affects retrenchment through what we call attrition. That is, you do not fill existing vacant posts, but you close them. And this is what they are doing at the current moment. And this spreads across. The health sector, for instance, had about 37,000 vacant posts in 2018. And you can, for instance, looking at the public sector wage bill, tell that those positions or those vacant posts have not been filled. Now, if you look at it in that instance, and I was also speaking to certain social worker practicing students last week that been retrenched. Sorry, they did their community service, but they were not absorbed because the department does not have money. So all services that government is offering at the current moment are going to suffer because there is a reduction and a reduction in the public sector wage bill in real terms, and that would affect, therefore, any retention of the staff, but also creation of any new posts. Now, as a result, we know as a matter of fact that once that happens is that you have workers, you have the poor people who are beneficiaries of the public sector services in health, in education, in social services, in social development, in correctional services, policing. You would find, because the main beneficiaries of these services are the poor people. And this is the reason why I agree with Dominic's categorization that this is a question of the capitalist class and the ANC government implementing the neoliberal austerity measures against the poor, not only attacking the workers at the level of employment, but also attacking the working class at the level of receiving these services, because the quality of these services will be inadequate, and as a result, they would suffer. And those who are benefiting from them would get inadequate and inefficient
Thanks
services.
for
And
that.
you already
Yes,
see
yes.
with the cutting
Trevor,
of services in the public sector.
we have to go to a break, but we get the point about that it is in fact the poor people, poor communities, rural communities and urban communities who will suffer the cut in the services as a result of this austerity measures, starting with public sector wages. Before we take more discussion, we're going to go on a quick break. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. Dominique, before the break, I did say that I wanted to come back to you because earlier on in the show, you'd given an indication that there are certain elements that AIDC would like to put on the table to support some of the calls by public sector unions in this 2021 wage negotiation season. Dominique?
Yeah, I think the big question relates to where's the money. I think Comrade Trevor maps out and articulates the issue of the connections between public sector workers and beneficiaries, people dependent on public services in a clear way. So for us, the question then is, okay, we agree we need to save the public sector. It's important in parts in driving a just recovery. Here we are saying that there's a number of options that the public sector unions can use to strengthen their arguments to show that not only is this a political decision taken by government, that it doesn't have to be this way, but there's also money to ensure that we can employ the kind of public sector workers we need in the economy. The one thing which is probably an obvious example is that we see that the MPs, the legislature, members of the executive continue to get above inflationary increases. And we think that when it comes to these pay levels, it's easy to take a small haircut here when you're earning more than R1 million a year. Why aren't MPs, ministers, etc., not taking a wage increase so that EPWP workers, public sector workers can get it?
Dominique,
I see you want
Dominique,
to interject.
I do. And I think this is quite an important question that we hope maybe you can shed some light on as AIDC. The discrepancies in level 1 to 7 compared to level 8 to 12 is huge in the public sector. DDGs that earn 1.6 million a year. Is this this is the can that the Zuma administration started in the national election when he was still in power? And I'm using the Zuma administration and not the president. Are we reaping, or at least are we being haunted by that in this iteration even? Dominique?
I don't think it's clear cut, okay? Because we did see the introduction of the occupation specific dispensation in 2007 to 2010. And basically what this was to say is that many public sector workers are highly skilled, highly educated, many of them with postgraduate degrees. And so the idea was to get a pay that's commensurate with your qualifications. So there was an increase at some of the pay levels. If you're having PhDs and engineers, etc., how are you going to attract these people into the public sector if you don't have a pay that's competitive with the private sector? So there's that aspect. But then you also get administrators, some public officials and ministers whose pay is way over the top. And that includes, I would say, the grades 12 to 16 within the, and I think there's even a 17th grade, but to very few people. And that's the areas that we can say, look, let's try and reduce the levels of inequality within the public sector. And as you correctly say, and as but police has also pointed out earlier on, EPWP workers, CWP workers are extremely underpaid and exploited. The next quick point I would say, and this will be very quick, I promise, is that public sector workers should consider the role that the government employees pension fund can play over and above the question about home loans. You see, workers and government makes a contribution to the government employees pension fund every month, okay? And basically what we can say is that let's put a moratorium on pension contributions for the next year because we see that the GPF is overfunded. So let's say, okay, workers, keep your 7% contribution for the next year. That helps to increase the disposable income of workers. And government can do the same, which increases the level of resources that government has at its disposal. There's lots of other potential pools of finance that can be tapped into, but that's just like two very clear-cut, easy examples that can show that there are definitely possibilities. And if we agree that this is not just an attack on workers, but an attack on services, then these financing alternatives are critical in the context of mass unemployment and incomparable levels of inequality.
Dominic, I agree that there has to be a different way of unlocking resources that don't necessarily mean we have to implement austerity measures. In the last few moments of our show, I want to bring in Fidusa, noting that they are part of the court challenge regarding the 2018 wage agreement. And Fidusa, if you could very quickly give us just an update to our viewers before we go to the close of the show, where we are with the Constitutional Court case.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Are you able to see me?
I see you perfectly. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. With regard to what is happening at the courts right now, the court said on the 24th of this month, and then the judgment was reserved. The judgment was reserved. I think all of us, including our sister unions, are waiting for the judges to make a determination on the 2018 Resolution 1 of 2018 last leg. So we are all waiting. That is what is happening now.
Thank you so much. I want to give Saftu and Nahawu, Trevor and Bakolisi the final word. Give us a sense going forward as you also await the determination. What is the position of your unions in this next process as we lead to the 2022 wage cycle? And unfortunately, I can only give you each 15 seconds. So away you go. Challenge accepted.
Okay, from our side, as the South African Federation of Trade Unions, the major public sector unions believe that the only way to really capacitate the public sector would be to ensure that we campaign against austerity. And that does not only require trade unions in the public sector, but also requires the beneficiaries of the public services, and that those are communities, the poor people in communities. And it is for that reason that we, together with the Cry of Excluded, the People's Assembly, and through the Working Class Summit processes, we are then organizing those people to begin a campaign against austerity measures.
Nahawu, I have to give you 10 seconds, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, we would not want to repeat what Saftu had raised. But in simple terms, what we're saying is how come the 2022 negotiations, the popesal dance, because we're not prepared really to allow a situation that people will continue to want votes from workers with the ticket that you are going to have better life for all. Whereas people, they actually mean better life for those who are in parliament.
Thank you.
Not
thank you,
to the life of
Bakolisi.
working.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you to our guests, Trevor Shaku from SAFTU, Dominic Brown, AIDC, Bakolisi Mali from Nahawu, and Dr. Lufuno Malahatsi from Fidusa. To you at home, thank you so much for joining us. And to our guests, we hope to see you soon on the Workers' World Labour Show. From me, Helga, and the crew, till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.